Welcome player 10086 to enter the game of Weird. Your mission is only one, live to the end. Asterisk. The first time a player sees Sangqi in the game, they all feel that she is the embodiment of holiness and beauty. Until seeing the little girl bending her eyes and whispering softly, the Buddha came to cheat the god, and the people crushed their teeth and sighed that they were really blind. Sangqi was obviously a black-hearted rice dumpling. Sangqi. You don't understand, this is called the professional competence of a fraudster. Everyone was filled with grief and anger. Get out of the game with your professional skills. Asterisk. Sangqi was born out of lies and deception. She deeply understands the root of human nature and tirelessly tests it to make a living. She is known as a fraudster. A eerie village infested with poisonous insects. A remote mountain village full of ghosts and shadows. A lonely island surrounded by the sea on all sides. Sangqi tirelessly showcases the charm of the fraudster's language, while her teammates remind her with worry, be careful not to get lost. Until another instance ended, Sangqi remained silent. Has no one told her that game NPCs will appear in reality? Keywords of the novel. Becoming a bug in a bizarre game without pop-ups, becoming a bug in a bizarre game, downloading the complete set of bugs, becoming a bug in a bizarre game, reading the latest chapters. Chapter 1. The Hometown of Witches and Gums, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The Hometown of Witches and Gums, 1. There was a loud bang in his ear, and a light shone in. Sangqi, who had not experienced the light for a long time, instinctively squinted his eyes, trying to block the sudden light in front of him. The girl closed her piercing eyes tightly, and the cold sweat wet her temples. Her body trembled violently with the amplitude of her breathing, as if she was in an unknown situation. Amidst the chaos of his thoughts, Sangqi seemed to hear a mechanical sound in his ear. Welcome player 10086 to enter the game of Weird. Your mission is only one, live to the end. The emotionless mechanical sound reverberated in the ear, and the harsh mechanical tail continued to roll and reverberate to the ear until there was a sound like foam breaking. Sangqi gave a severe shiver. She is completely awake. A few seconds later, Sangqi's eyes adapted to the light, and she made a move. This is a small and dirty space, her hands and feet are tied with ropes, and she has a sealing cloth on her mouth. Sangqi leaned against the hard iron sheet behind her and barely straightened up. She curled up in a corner, surrounded by many people in the same situation as her. The space they were in was not large, with only a large expanse of light in front of them. At the location of the light, someone slowly approached and scanned their eyes, seemingly recording the number of people. Sangqi lowered his eyes. This is a truck carriage, and most of the people around her are dressed in casual clothes. A man not far away is still wearing a shirt with the words XX Tourist Group printed on it. A tourist group with an unknown destination was bound here midway. What will be done? A bizarre game. Sangqi recalled the mechanical sound just now and furrowed his brow. Ding-dong, a ethereal tapping sound exploded in everyone's ears. At the moment this sound appeared, everything around us fell into a state of stillness. The people around them who had already woken up let out sobs, unable to speak due to their mouths being sealed, and could only reluctantly wriggle their bodies, with naked eyes filled with fear of the unknown. Ding-dong. Welcome a new group of tourists to the strange game. I believe you all have doubts about the situation in front of us. First of all, I regret to inform you that you are all dead. A bus heading towards a city collided with an oil tanker on a bridge, causing an explosion. None of the people present survived at the moment when the voice spoke. Sangqi had already sat up straight, with the back of her hand behind her, and flexibly untied the rope that bound her wrist. Then she hesitated for a moment. Skilled in tying a knot for oneself. Sangqi lifted her head, and with the hint of this voice, she slowly recalled. She is a fraudster, and with her superb acting skills and extremely high professional ethics, she has made a name for herself in this circle. Sangqi never trusts anyone. She knows the root of human nature and cannot withstand any temptation. The previous task had just ended, and Sangqi wanted to relax for a while. She signed up for a tour group and planned to go to the beach with the group. As a result, the vehicle exploded midway and no one survived. Someone beside me let out a hasty sob, disbelieving everything they had experienced. It seems that you all have already remembered, so let's post game missions below. Game Dungeon. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are tourists who were sold to the land of witchcraft by the unscrupulous tourism agency and bought to test the insects. Next, please observe carefully and find ways to escape and survive. Main task. Survival. The crowd emitted a hint of restlessness. The mechanical sound seemed to recall something and slowly added a sentence. Kind reminder. When there is only one person left in the dungeon, that person will directly pass the level. The bizarre game adopts a live streaming point system, and outstanding players can receive rewards from the audience. The points can be exchanged for items in the mall, and they can save their lives in critical moments. Alright, I wish everyone a pleasant game. As the final sound of the last word falls, the previously static surroundings begin to operate. Sangqi raised her eyes slightly, and a panel appeared in front of her. Her name was in the upper left corner, and the number of live streaming viewers was in the upper right corner. Currently, it is displayed as 0. All of this is too surreal, but the feeling of being devoured by the flames is particularly clear, and she cannot ignore it. The man who was counting the number of people not far away had already walked up to him. Sangqi saw clearly a centipede as thick as a wrist coiled around his neck, swaying and swirling with the man's movements, with a shiny black shell. A girl beside her couldn't help but let out a suppressed scream of surprise. Sangqi looked up and saw that the man had already turned his face around. His face was smooth and neat, as if it was wrapped in a thin human skin like cicada wings, unable to even find any grooves or curves. The centipede hovering around its neck shook its head, making a subtle friction sound as it crawled. This person has no facial features. As if the counting had been completed, the man turned his head to look at the person outside the carriage and said, "These few, please take them to my pharmacy." He turned his back to the crowd, but his fingers accurately pointed at a few people. Sangqi keenly noticed. This person has no facial features, and his voice seems to be emitted by a centipede on his neck. The person who was pointed out was quickly taken away in a sack, unable to even struggle. Men seem to be in a leading position among these people. They are like observing the cabbage and radish in the market, picking and choosing with a casual tone, dividing everyone into several parts. The people around were gradually taken away in burlap bags. There are only 3 people left. Sangqi leaned back against the carriage, pressing her fingers on the long untied knot, calmly analyzing the chances of winning if she untied the rope and ran away. The girl gently glanced at more than 10 people standing outside the carriage. And the ground was covered with snakes and insects. She withdrew her gaze. Human beings, should be pursued. The man picked for a while and finally turned around. The centipede crawled on him for a while, as if pondering, while the people next to him waited for his guidance. Sangqi vaguely heard some words that were being repeated repeatedly. Priests, blood, and chi. I don't know how long it has been. The man finally spoke out. It's like a silent verdict. Send the remaining 3 people to the high priest. The moment when the words fall. Sangqi saw a few people flooding into his live broadcast room, and the original audience changed from 0 to 7. I'm here. Is this the unlucky one for this instance of sacrificing to heaven? I have been waiting for a long time. It was unfortunate to be selected from the beginning. This little girl is quite beautiful. What a pity. I have watched the Witch Goo dungeon many times, and other players who were taken away in batches still have a chance of survival, falling into the hands of the high priest, but no player has ever survived this high priest. The audience seemed to say something later, but Sangqi couldn't see it and it turned into a bunch of garbled code. Thank you, my dear friends, for supporting Sangqi Female Goose. I hope to vote and comment more to discuss the plot. I will reply when I see it from the perspective of the female protagonist in this book. The male protagonist has some scenes but not many in the early stages. The male protagonist is not weak, but the female protagonist has a dual ceiling of intelligence and combat power throughout the book, and likes to raise boys. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The Land of Witches and Gums. She realized that this was probably due to the audience spoiling the copy information, so it was directly blocked. The high priest. It looks like a very unpredictable person. Sangqi just raised his eyes, and the burlap bag had already been placed head on. It seemed like there was some medicine inside, and the girl fell into a coma. Sangqi was awakened by a crisp sound of bells. The effectiveness of the anesthetic has not completely dissipated, and when the girl looked up, she could only barely see that there seemed to be a layer of fog in front of her. The burlap that blocked her view had been removed, revealing a small, pale face. She was casually thrown onto the ground by someone. Sangqi shook her head and looked up to see the villagers carrying them over as if they were negotiating with someone. She couldn't see clearly the person surrounded in the center from too far away. Only a pleasant and crisp sound of bells could be heard, passing slowly and rhythmically into people's ears. I can't see clearly at all. Every time the high priest comes here, he is blocked. He doesn't like to see outsiders, and these players' gaming journey ends here. He seems to have never appeared in the subsequent key plot, so he should be an NPC who only lives in legends. Cough. Next step. I don't need to test the medicine. With the appearance of this barrage, Sangqi's live broadcast room suddenly began to continuously attract the audience, and everyone neatly typed the same sentence on the barrage. It's like a spontaneous farewell ceremony. At the same time, the high priest, surrounded by villagers in the middle, waved his hand indifferently. Sangqi heard exactly what the bullet screen said. I don't need to test the medicine, I'll throw it all into the snake den. This sentence was not blocked, and the audience spontaneously scrolled wildly on the barrage, as if mourning her. But the barrage was brushing wildly, with a faint hint of excitement. They are preparing for her next death. Excited. Sangqi lifted his head and revealed a pale and fragile face. Her appearance has always been deceptive, with a cold and serene face. Everyone thought that Sangqi was a holy and beautiful incarnation when they first met her. She didn't need to do anything, just sit quietly there, like a saint being elevated to the altar. The barrage paused for a second. A few bullet comments were faintly mixed in the death frenzy and sent out. This player looks like a goddess statue. Seems to be in the later stage. The barrage arrived here, and the subsequent words were directly intervened by the system and turned into a mess of garbled code. It seems to involve plot information. Sangqi slowly sat up from the ground with the help of skillful force. She gently moved her wrist, and the rope tied to her wrist fell off. These people are not watching this game instance for the first time, so they are very familiar with the direction of the story. However, due to the intervention of the system, the bullet comments about the plot cannot be seen by players. Sangqi pondered. But just now, the words thrown into the snake cave were sent out before the NPC's mouth, and the system did not stop them. This is because the system has already assumed that they will definitely die next, so even if they see this message, it will not affect the direction of the plot. The girl pursed her lips gently. This may be due to systemic cognition. A bug that she can exploit. The two people who were tied up with her still hadn't woken up due to the effect of anesthesia. Sangqi had already prepared and held his breath when the sack came over. Although he inhaled a little, he still woke up quickly. She moved her hand. Behind are rough ropes and sharp small stones. Sangqi picked up the sharpest stone and slashed it at his wrist, which had already been scratched by the rope. Blood fell to the ground along the girl's fingertips. Snakes and insects hovering around the NPC's neck keenly smelled the bloody smell and turned their heads to look at Sangqi. When they met the girl's clear and bright eyes, they were surprised for a moment. How did she wake up? Sangqi untied the rope on her feet 3 times and 5 times, then stood up with her sore body. The blood on her wrist was still dripping down, passing through her palm and hitting the ground with a snap along her fingertips. The faces of several NPCs surrounding the high priest suddenly changed. I remember, you don't like blood. Sangqi didn't look at those NPCs and stared at the figure surrounded in the middle, speaking softly and slowly. With an inexplicable sense of certainty. The barrage was also confused. What does that mean? Why are these NPCs afraid to move? Their faces are so pale, are they afraid? But this player didn't do anything. Oh no, she cut her hand. OMO, I suddenly remembered that although this dungeon has a high mortality rate among novice dungeons, very few players are killed by blood. They seem to be restraining players from bleeding. Sangqi quickly scanned the barrage while everyone was stunned, and she looked up again. Is this how you treat foreign guests when I'm not around? The girl gently shook her hands and wiped away the dirt on her face, revealing a pale and beautiful little face. She was slightly shorter than these NPCs, but her expression was cold when she looked up at people. It seems like she is the person standing in a high position. The shameless man who started picking players hesitated and took a step forward, while the centipede on his neck anxiously gathered and stared at Sangqi's face for a long time. Sangqi curved his lips and smiled, so, don't you all remember my appearance? This sentence was like a reminder, and everyone looked over in disbelief. The moment they met the girl's gaze, they instinctively moved away. Until someone murmurs to themselves. Goddess. It was like a thunderbolt on the flat ground, waking up all the other NPCs who were still pondering and unsure. The crowd looked at the little girl in front of them in disbelief, and when they met the familiar face, their face turned a bit pale in an instant. They were wrapped around their necks with insects like snakes and insects, although their facial features disappeared completely unlike those of shameless men. The skin on their faces also showed an abnormal cyan-purple color. Perhaps they use people to test goo, as well as themselves to test goo. When Sangqi cut his wrist, he used a considerable amount of force, but deliberately avoided the arterial area, causing the blood flow to slow down significantly. She faced everyone's scrutiny directly and couldn't see any signs of guilt. At first, she only heard the shameless man vaguely mention a few words, mentioning the high priest and blood. Sangqi guessed that they were deliberately suppressing the appearance of blood. One reason is that the habits of various insects make it difficult to change their natural traits, even if they are tamed and relied upon by humans. Blood gas will make these snakes and insects difficult to control. Secondly, Sangqi guessed that it was because of this high priest, who did not like the taste of blood. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The Land of Witches and Gums. At first, Sangqi planned to cheat on the way they sent her and the other 2 people into the snake cave, but when she saw the bullet screen saying that she looked very much like a goddess, she changed her mind. Sangqi is inherently a reckless gambler who is passionate about playing all roles. The higher the difficulty level, the more it can arouse people's desire to win or lose. The sense of being on the brink of death in a life or death situation will only make her more conscious. It's hard for you to still remember. The girl curved her eyes with a smile and casually touched the wound on her wrist. These people do not value the appearance of outsiders, and it ends with just a glance at their appearance, as they are only bought for drug testing. Only by standing at the taboo point of their fear can Sangqi force these people to face her head-on. Thus, when adrenaline surged, they used seemingly plausible language to become the goddess in their minds. It doesn't matter whether she is a goddess or not. As long as they believe, then she is the goddess of this village. Erectile role.playing, excellent language skills, and ambiguous push.pull techniques. Yes, It is a fraudster. The crowd fell silent, and in a stalemate, Sangqi heard the crisp sound of bells, one after another, in a rhythmic manner. Then, the crowd split in half like a wave, and the villagers spontaneously stood in two. The sound of the bells grew closer and closer. Sangqi let out a manual gesture hanging on his side. She slowly looked up, and the first thing she saw was the silver jewelry on the neck of the person in front of her. The exquisite craftsmanship created a vivid pattern, a coiled and sleeping venomous snake. Further up, the girl hesitated for a moment. Before meeting the high priest, she thought this person would be the kind portrayed in movies and TV dramas, a white-haired old man in his 50s, but the person standing in front of her was unexpectedly young. The shiny black hair hung neatly and smoothly, and the hair on the cheeks was fixed by beautiful silver jewelry, pinned behind the ears. The boy had long hair that was almost waist-length, with the end of the hair tied by silver jewelry, and two thin silver chains hanging on both sides. There are two bells at the end. This should be the source of the ringtone. The boy was wearing purple meow clothing, with a special and exquisite pattern embroidered on his waist belt. When he looked at him, his eyes were very indifferent, and his skin was somewhat abnormal with white. This is a young man who can be described as a beautiful monster, with a pale and delicate face and strange red lips, exuding a hint of mystery and enchantment, like a colorful venomous snake. Beautiful, but toxic. Sangqi looked at the person in front of him calmly. Until he saw a delicate tear mole at the corner of the boy's eye, Sangqi was lightly stunned for a moment. The location of that mole is extremely exquisite, giving it a youthful appearance without appearing feminine. It happens to be located just below the corner of the eye, diluting the sense of alienation brought by the cold expression in the eyes. He looked at the person in front of him indifferently and without warning, raised his hand to pinch Sangqi's wrist. My gaze lingered for a moment on the wound on her wrist, then the young man raised his eyes and spoke in a faint tone, unable to hear any emotions. Goddess. Sangqi licked her lips and didn't answer, just silently staring into the eyes of the young priest. Compared to their stalemate, the barrage was fiery. The first time I saw the appearance of the high priest, it wasn't an old man. He looked so beautiful, but how come he looks so scary? He seems to be able to bite me in the next second. This player named Sangqi has a bit of courage, but why does she seem to be very familiar with these people? She shouldn't have been taken away by the little ghosts in the dungeon, right? Sangqi's expression remained unchanged and he looked back carefully. She has always understood a truth. When unsure of the situation, speak more and make more mistakes. What she needs to do is to guide her with seemingly plausible words and let them find suitable reasons for her in their hearts. Commonly known as self-strategy. The young priest first shifted his gaze and slowly took a step back, wiping the hand that had just touched Sangqi without leaving a trace. Several villagers beside him were waiting for his instructions, but they were already 7 or 8% convinced. They have all seen statues of goddesses and worship them every year. This similar face is the first time I have seen it. And her calm demeanor when speaking is not similar to those screaming and panicking outsiders. The priest stared at Sangqi for 2 seconds, then he slowly bent his lips and gently placed his right hand in front of his left shoulder, bowing slightly to make a "please" gesture. This way, please. He seemed to find it very interesting, with a smile overflowing from his throat, biting every word clearly. Goddess. The young priest did not believe her. From the scattered attitude of the person ahead, Sangqi was very aware of this. But he didn't expose her, just played down her scenes. Did he find it interesting, or did he feel that she, as a small outsider, couldn't stir up any waves? Sangqi took the initiative to say, "It seems like you don't believe me." The young priest's footsteps paused for a moment, and the sound of the bell also stopped. He turned his head and raised his chin at Sangqi, saying, "Perhaps you can come up with some convincing reasons for me." The boy's eyebrows and eyes were delicate and beautiful, with the girl's figure clearly reflected in the amber-light pupils. A small mole under the corner of his eye seemed to be able to speak. Sangqi rubbed his brow wearily, avoided looking at him again, and his tone remained calm as usual. I have been living outside for a long time, and I can't remember many things anymore. But when I came back here today, I felt that everything here was very familiar, as if I belonged here from the beginning. The boy stopped in his tracks. Sangqi continued to speak up. I was originally here for tourism, but when I opened my eyes, I appeared here. Perhaps there was some fate between me and this place. The priest turned his head to look at Sangqi, his pale and beautiful face filled with thoughts, as if judging the credibility of her words. But the girl's eyes were sparkling, with a determined expression, showing no signs of guilt. I'm not interested in whether you're a goddess or not. The young priest wrapped his arms around his hands, and the silver belt tied to the end of his hair swayed gently as he walked. The exquisitely crafted silver jewelry on his neck also made a slight sound as he stood in front of Sangqi, gently bending down. He casually curled up the hair in Sangqi's ear, placed it on his lips, and then looked up. The villagers in the village are divided into two factions, and you can choose to join one of them. The boy withdrew his hand, curved his lips and smiled, gently tilting his head. Or, join me. Before Sangqi could make a sound, the barrage began to brush wildly. I am willing to marry a priest, even if it is a concubine. I don't want to be tempted either, but he smiled at me. The previous one laughed at the anchor. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. The Land of Witches and Gums. But as for the matter, I remember that in the later stages, both factions had to fight each other, and only one faction could win and survive. Without the appearance of a high priest, the young priest was unaware of the discussion on the barrage. He just looked at Sangqi in front of him. His fair and slender fingers gently caressed the girl's neck, with their fingertips pressed against her pulsating artery. Do you want to think about it? He chuckled lightly, but his movements didn't look like they were disgust. The boy leaned closer and said, "Little goddess." Sangqi lifted his eyes slightly. The high priest did not believe her words. But I saw some of her usefulness, such as the hesitation and uncertainty of those people about her identity just now. Sangqi asked, "Is it cooperation?" The young priest responded gently, "It's an order." The girl blinked her eyes gently, as if afraid. She lowered her head, her closed eyes filled with indifference, and her mouth responded softly. Okay. Challenging opponents are the most interesting. Sooner or later, he was deceived into leaving no bitter tea seeds. The interior decoration of the priest's cabin is very simple, surrounded by various beautiful and colorful plants. Sangqi cautiously didn't make any further movements. She stood in place and pondered for 2 seconds before turning her head to look at the young man and saying, "My name is Sangqi, what's your name?" The young man didn't look up and said, "I don't have a Chinese name." "Then I can't just call you the priest's name, can I?" Sangqi spread his hands and rolled his eyes twice, feeling a bit mischievous. "I once read a sentence in ancient books, take the dog away, let the grass return. The ancients also said, the more the wind spreads, the more the black chicken will be eaten, and the autumn eggs will be eaten." The girl gently elongates the ending sound. Combining 2 lines of poetry, why don't I just call you dog eggs? On the other hand, the players who were taken away and sent to various households for testing goo were divided into 2 groups, each of whom was given a goo insect and asked to feed it with fresh blood. Every 3 days, there will be a battle between the 2 groups of insects, and only the victorious insects can survive. The man who tells the rules is strict, with a wrist-sized snake hovering around his neck, spitting out snake venom at the player. The player cannot help but take a step back. The man continued. Your only role is to take care of the goo in your hand. If the goo dies, you have no value in using it. Someone in the crowd couldn't help but speak up and ask, "Goo died. What will happen?" The snake circling around the man's neck spun around, spitting out snake venom in the direction of speaking. The man comforted and touched the snake's body. If not stopped by the man, it was feared that the snake would rush out and bite their necks in the next second. There is a place on the edge of the village called the Snake Cave. They are all raised with the most poisonous snakes and insects. The man suddenly smiled and said, because what they eat and drink has always been human. The players instantly fell silent. When the man left, a few people were left to guard the door. The crowd gradually began to make sounds, mostly murmuring and complaining softly. Why did I encounter these? Just like a tide, at first only a drop of water fell in, but later it triggered the agreement of others, with faint sobs mixed in the middle. Enough. A man on the edge couldn't help but scold, what's the use of complaining now? Don't forget, in reality we're all dead. If we don't follow that damn system, none of us can survive. The barrage was scattered and scattered. Finally, a sober one came out. This young man looks quite bold. What's his name? Chen Shen. Give you a thumbs up for it. Chen Shen only saw a thumbs up like effect on the screen, and then his points changed from 0 to 10. The icon of the shopping mall appeared next to the avatar in the live broadcast room. This is. Chen Shen was stunned for a moment and quickly realized. By relying on rewards and exploration points, you can redeem items in real time at the mall. He is a game anchor in reality, and he accepts these things faster than most people. The audience in the live broadcast room will also be the key to whether they pass the level. Chen Shen no longer hesitated and browsed through the shopping mall. His points were too low and there were very few things he could buy. In the end, he only chose the cheapest nutritional supplements to fill his stomach. He hesitated for a moment and looked around. Everyone, there will be viewers watching in everyone's live broadcast room to understand their needs. Perhaps you can use the reward points to purchase life saving items. We are already standing here, complaining is useless. Everyone should work together and strive to survive. As soon as Chen Shen finished speaking, his live broadcast room added 2 small tips. The young man raised his lips imperceptibly and slowly lowered his eyes. He understood that the scenes of leaders and saviors could easily capture a portion of the audience. He is already the anchor, but he knows exactly what to do, win the favor of the audience. These people demand that they feed the insects with fresh blood, to some extent binding their life and death to the insects. The initial form of these distributed insects is no different from that of ordinary insects. And feeding Chen Shen's eyes were deep, and he lowered his gaze to look at the insect in his hand that kept colliding in the jar. It was a very weak insect, as if one finger could crush it to death, but now it was bound to their lives. He pondered for a moment, then cut his finger and dripped blood into the small jar. The insect smelled the smell of blood and quickly rushed to the side of the blood, swallowing it. After Chen Shen tentatively dripped a few drops of blood, he withdrew his hand and looked down at the bug. It seemed that it didn't crave much blood. Seeing that Chen Shen no longer gave it blood, he found a corner to nest in, and the whole bug shrank into a ball. It seems that it's not that scary either. Chen breathed a sigh of relief. Several people around saw this situation and also followed Chen Shen's approach by dripping a few drops of blood into it. In the next few days, villagers will come every day to check the feeding situation of the goo bug, and what makes these people feel a bit threatened is that the goo bug can no longer be killed with just a few drops of blood like in the beginning. If they cannot be fed enough blood, the insects will continuously hit the jar. They are tireless and unaware of pain. Even incidents of hitting oneself to death occurred. The goo insects died, and their owners were naturally dragged out. The players who are confined in the house have no way of knowing their experiences, only know that the mechanical sound broadcasts a decrease in the number of players without emotion. Without a doubt, these people have all died. With these lessons from the past, players have become more cautious in their attitude towards goo bug. We can only obediently give them more blood. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The land of witches and gums. Chen had been a game anchor at home before, and his physical fitness was not very good. Over the next few days, due to the sharp increase in the thirst for blood from Gu Bubu, his lips began to turn slightly white. He glanced at the scattered barrage in the live broadcast room. The most boring part has begun. Above, I actually feel that this passage is the most interesting. Watching people gradually being domesticated and can only become blood packets for feeding goo bug insects is not more interesting than killing everyone at first. Anchor, I'll show you a clear path. Chen stared quietly at the barrage, glancing at the jar placed next to him. After several days of blood feeding, the insect had become brightly colored, with a faint hint of crimson beneath its black shell. As its owner, Chen complexion is getting worse day by day. The food provided by the villagers is limited to survival and will not provide them with any health supplements. Chen vaguely realized that all of them were risking their lives to feed these poisonous insects. If we continue like this, we may not be able to carry on until the final stage, and we will have already been eaten by Gubu. What kind of clear road? Chen spoke softly. His appearance is decent, and when he was a game anchor, he was also somewhat famous. Many people didn't just enter the live broadcast room to watch games, but simply to watch him. These days, his mind has been able to remain clear, largely due to his skillful use of his past experience of asking fans for gifts, receiving many rewards, and relying on points to exchange for items in the mall. He managed to barely survive. The others around me are already a bit overwhelmed. Anchor, should I have mentioned the broadcast sound from the beginning? Besides following the rules, there is also a relatively fast way to pass the level, right? The barrage points to the end, avoiding all words that would be blocked. Chen's breath quickened a bit as he stared at the barrage, followed by many people playing Schadenfreude. He certainly remembers what the other method is. When there is only one player left in the world, that player will automatically pass the level. Without a doubt. This priest really doesn't quite understand Chinese. So when Sangqi shamelessly lay in his ear and shouted, "Dog eggs," the priest just sat in place thinking for a moment. He agreed. After all, the few lines of poetry in Sangqi's mouth sound very artistic. In theory, the young priest should be the more dominant one among the two, but Sangqi has always been reckless in her actions, with 99% stability and 1% wealth. She will definitely choose the rear for both. "I'm not cooperating with you," the young priest frowned and reminded her. Sangqi nodded with a smile and said, "I know. But since he wants to use her, he has to keep her. As long as she is still alive, nothing is scary." One day, while the young man was practicing Gu with his eyes down, Sangqi walked in unsteadily from the door. She stood 3 steps away from the young priest and looked at the little black snake entwined in his hand. The black snake hovering around the young man's forearm was only fingers thick and thin, with a shiny black body and a faint blood-red color on its head. The black snake shuttled between the young man's fingers, occasionally spitting out snake venom at Sangqi. "Your Gu." Sangqi leaned closer. The young man looked up at her and said in a calm tone, "I have been fed with blood since I was young, and there is a connection with me." He paused for a moment. "If it were anywhere, mountains and rivers, I could find it." Sangqi understands clearly that it serves a function similar to positioning. She couldn't be considered interested in this. Although Gu Chong was not convinced, she never caused trouble for herself and naturally wouldn't touch the priest's gubu casually. The girl turned around and walked to the side, finding a seat to sit down and yawning gently. The dark and penetrating eyes swept over without emotion, and the girl's cold and indifferent demeanor when she didn't speak was very intimidating. Even if she just sat down casually, she seemed out of place with everything around her. "Your Gu looks small, but it looks very poisonous," commented Sangqi. The black snake hovering in the priest's hand was much smaller than the others in the village, but it posed an increasing threat to Sangqi. The young man let out a low snort, non-committal. Everyone in the village is raising Gu, but the strength of Gu insects seems to be different. Is it because the blood they feed is different, or is it mixed with other things? The girl looked up, her eyes bright, without any impurities, as if she was just curious. The young man glanced over and suddenly understood. Yes, Sangqi had a sense of estrangement from the world. Even though she was laughing, it seemed like she was far away. Just like the statues of goddesses enshrined in temples. She seems to be born with a sacred aura that cannot be defiled. It is precisely this imposing appearance that has been intimidating those brainless fools outside for a moment. He never believed it, and now he also has a hint of hesitation. If you are interested, you can investigate on your own. The priest spoke in a tone as indifferent as ever, his beautiful face cold as ice, as if remembering something. He rarely curled his lips, with a childish innocence. If you can live. Sangqi seemed to have noticed something and looked up with a sense, meeting the scrutinizing gaze of the young man. She couldn't dodge or dodge, and curved her lips to smile at the young man. The girl's eyes were bright, and the young priest noticed them the first time he saw her, just like the penetrating black grapes, which also reminded him of the goddesses worshipped in the village. How could someone like walking out of a goddess statue? Sangqi has always been able to guess people's hearts. The young man didn't even speak, so she stood up first and walked to him. The girl's eyebrows and eyes curved, with a hint of seduction, and her tone of voice twisted 18 times. Perhaps I am really a goddess, maybe. The priest turned to look at her, and the young man's beautiful and magnificent appearance was quite aggressive. His fair and slender fingers gently lifted and pinched Sangqi's chin. The boy gently bent down, his lips almost pressed against her ear. He slowly blew a breath into Sangqi's ear. Sangqi instinctively shrank, feeling goosebumps all over her body. He saw too accurately. How could he know that her ears were too sensitive to be easily touched? Before she could speak, she felt the boy gently caressing her face. The young man stepped back a bit, speaking in a tone without any emotion. If you really are, the first thing I do will be kill you. He called out word by word. Sangqi. Sangqi's expression remained unchanged, and Yu Guang glanced at the live broadcast room. Sihahaha, why do I think the little priest looks so sarcastic when his hand is still resting on the host's face? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Land of Witches and Gums. The village priest seems to have never appeared before. Has there been any problem with the plot? In front of me, it seems like I just arrived. I suggest you double speed and take a look at what happened to the anchor in front of me. On the other hand, I timidly knelt down and begged for mercy. The anchor pretended to be mischievous and quickly replaced the position of the village goddess. The person who scared me was stunned. The anchor's ears are red, ha ha ha, hurry up and fight back. The sound of tinkling bells and banging sounds of rewards. Sangqi gradually felt relieved as she watched the growing balance on her face. She raised her hand and pinched the wrist where the priest pinched her face. The girl gently raised her eyes, feeling the skin touched by her fingertips as cold as jade, with an extremely strange touch. The girl lifted her eyes and scanned, only to find that the small black snake was winding up along her fingers, lying on the back of her hand and spitting snake venom at her. The cold touch of the cold-blooded animal made her expression strange for a second. Then she gently raised her hand and stared at the black and translucent head of the little black snake, with a faint hint of red in the darkness. Sangqi raised his finger slightly and touched the head of the little black snake. The little black snake seemed to have never been treated like this before. Its amber pupils were fixed on the girl, its head slightly hanging down, and it tentatively rubbed against the back of Sangqi's hand. The young priest noticed and coldly lifted the tail of the little black snake, throwing it behind him. The barrage was filled with joy. Ha ha ha! The owner of his own family spoke harshly in front of him to kill the anchor, but his snake obediently rubbed against the anchor's small hand from behind. I really can't laugh anymore. I can see that the anchor has been coveting that smooth snake head for a long time, and his expression is completely eager to try. Sangqi saw it and curved his lips, laughing loudly. If she were a goddess, would she have any uncontrollable impact on the priests? People who have always been indifferent will speak harshly and want to take action against her. The young priest leaned very close to her, and Sangqi raised his head slightly and leaned towards the young man's ear. She whispered, "Let's wait and see." The little scammer who claimed to be the goddess he picked up is not very clever. When the priest was refining goo, he lowered his eyes and thought to himself, "Anyone who is threatened with the idea of killing you should stay away from him as soon as possible," instead of the girl in front of her boldly taking the fire he used to refine goo and grilling meat outdoors. The young man was disturbed by the pungent aroma and couldn't sit still. He walked out of the house with a stiff face and saw the little scammer sitting on the stone bench in the courtyard, with several big elders beside him helping her roast meat attentively. "It's time to flip over," Sangqi commanded with a smile. Most of the people in the village have been feeding goo since childhood, and are very afraid of the flames. The goo insects entangled around their necks have long avoided them. They wiped the sweat off their heads and obediently flipped the grilled meat on their hands. A little boy stood timidly at the entrance of the yard, sniffing the fragrance and looking at Sangqi with his head and head. Sangqi noticed a slight smile on his face, gentle and holy. She waved at the little boy. The little boy boldly approached and said, "Sister, what are you baking?" "Sangqi." "Rabbit." The little boy widened his eyes and said, "The rabbit is so cute, why roast the rabbit?" "That's reasonable." Sangqi nodded in agreement, with a pitiful expression on his face. "It's so cute. I passed by and saw them being besieged, so I decided to save them." The girl paused for a moment, her smile growing stronger. "I didn't have enough skills, so I saved half of them first." "Little boy." The barrage in the live broadcast room laughed wildly. God TM didn't have enough skills, so he saved half of them first. Look at the children being fooled for a moment. I really made a fortune out of laughter. The anchor looks pitiful and has a completely different personality and appearance. I thought the anchor was the type of little white lotus virgin. Report, the anchor is cheating flowers. The man next to the barbecue patted the little boy's head and scolded softly, "Datu, you can't be unreasonable. Go home." Datu flattened his mouth, looking very afraid of men. The man looked up and said, "Sir, this is my son Datu. He is young and immature, so don't offend you." Sangqi supported his chin and waved his hand generously. The people who were grilling her meat in front of her had a high status in the village, and most of the people below respected them as elders. The man who spoke was also the faceless man who assigned the players' whereabouts. They respect her now because they cannot determine her identity, and her appearance and demeanor are particularly in line with the goddess statue they describe. At present, these people believe in her but not completely. This coming is just a probe. Sangqi leaned against the back of the chair, lowered his eyes and looked at his fingertips with a particularly melancholic expression. "Speaking of which, these days I have always had strange dreams. I dream of standing in countless clouds and looking up to see myself placed on a high platform, with people kneeling below." The elders exchanged a glance at each other. The expression is slightly solemn. What she mentioned should be the scene of sacrifice, according to Sangqi's perspective. She was worshipped on a high platform. The elder tugged his lips and said, "Sir, could you please elaborate more? I mentioned earlier that when I woke up, I was outside the village and didn't remember many things." Sangqi remained calm. "I had no father or mother and lived alone. It wasn't until this time I came to the village that I vaguely recalled many memories. I know it's hard for you to believe an outsider claiming to be your goddess. The half-truth and half-falsehood of what I said that day was partly due to the awakening of memories, and secondly." The girl tilted her head and smiled shyly, "I don't want to die." "That's true. Her profession is unique and she has always been on high voltage lines. Is this car accident a natural or man-made disaster? It is unknown. The girl spoke with a bewildered and sincere expression. She earnestly analyzed her life outside and calmly described the black tour guide selling tourists into the village as having a connection with him. As for what was seen in the dream, it was all fabricated. She once saw scenes of worshipping goddesses in the corner of the young priest's room, with countless people kneeling down on the stage. The scene was grand, and the goddess, who couldn't see her face, stood on the highest platform, praying for blessings for the people below in pity. The young man stood next to her at some point and saw the painting in Sangqi's hand. He sneered softly, "It's just a better named sacrifice." Without a doubt, the goddess of the past has long passed away. Even so, the status of so-called goddesses is not considered high. So Sangqi just planned to become her reincarnation, half true and half false. The scene in the dream is very hazy. I only remember that in the end, someone handed me a gesang flower. However, the next second, the gesang flower turned into a black monster, screaming and rushing towards me, tearing at my body. At this point, the girl's face had turned pale, as if she had truly seen the monster in her dream, with an indelible look of fear in her eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Land of Witches and Gums. When the two men heard this sentence, their expressions had already changed. Only elderly people like them who have attended the festival know that the dream mentioned by Sangqi has truly happened. Except for them, no one in the village knows about this matter. When they attended the ceremony, they were still young children and were not allowed to enter. However, the two of them secretly climbed up the highest roof and looked down to see a huge black monster engulfing everyone at the ceremony. With this in mind, the two of them looked at Sangqi with completely different eyes. Those who are able to know such things are by no means ordinary people. The elder patted his son's head and said, "Datu, go home." Datu stared at the roasted rabbit drooling, "But the rabbit smells so good." "No, it's so pitiful." Sangqi handed half of the roasted rabbit to Datu with a gentle expression and said, "Here, you saved half of the rabbit, I saved half. Together, we saved the whole rabbit." The little boy was holding half a rabbit in a daze. He pondered for a while, but the aroma disturbed him and he couldn't think normally. So the little boy nodded firmly. "Sister is right. We saved a rabbit." Datu left with half of the rescued rabbit, and the two men next to him seemed to want to say something, but the next second, they saw the young priest walking out of the room. The elder immediately put aside his words and bid farewell to Sangqi. After everyone else in the yard had finished walking, the young priest stood next to Sangqi. "Black monster." His tone was flat and he couldn't hear any emotions. Sangqi curved his lips and smiled, "What I saw in my dream." The young man looked at her steadily for a long time, but he didn't know if he believed her. Sangqi, however, did not pay much attention to his thoughts. He hummed a tune and pulled off a rabbit leg, handing it to the boy. "Here, do you want to try it?" The young man lowered his gaze for 2 seconds and hesitantly reached out to take it. The girl no longer looked at him, lowered her gaze and ate the rabbit meat, suppressing all the emotions in her eyes. The saying of "black monster" was created by Sangqi based on factual evidence. The flowers placed on the pilgrimage painting were heavily stained with ink, and at first glance, they looked like black monsters formed by thick fog. She is not lying. Just take speculation as evidence. As for what comes to the listener's mind, what matters to her as a storyteller? When Sangqi was thinking, his whole aura was very indifferent, his eyebrows and eyes were clean and beautiful, like a lazy cat carefully fed, huddled in one place after eating and drinking, thinking about his own things. The young priest has rarely eaten meat since he was young. After tasting the taste, he gave the remaining meat to the black snake perched on his forearm, which swallowed it along with its bones. He lowered his eyes and patted the head of the black snake. After finishing the rabbit meat in his hand, Sangqi spoke coldly, "Your Highness, as you said before, I can join any two factions or cooperate with you." She slowly wiped away the oil stains on her hands, stared at her own hands, and curled her fingers slightly. The girl lifted her head, her gaze clear. "I have seriously considered it and I plan to cooperate with you." The young man seemed to have heard something interesting and sneered, "You have no choice." "This statement is true." Sangqi nodded in agreement, and she curved her lips and chuckled lightly. "Sir, I guess the goddess hasn't been born for a long time, right? The position of priest is already the most powerful position in organizing sacrifices in the village. She believes that the gods can bestow blessings on them and carefully raises the goo insects as gifts from the gods. It's just that the goddess hasn't been born for a long time, and the latest sacrificial ceremony has also been unexpectedly blocked. The village's population has changed for generations, but there are not many villagers who remember the previous sacrificial scenes. The eldest and second elders are the two of them, and they are responsible for most of the affairs in the village. They have already elevated the priest's position but do not have much power." Sangqi sat in place, looking up at the young man standing in front of her with a smile and saying, "The position of a priest is dispensable for today's village, isn't it?" When he first entered the dungeon, Sangqi noticed it. The shameless man, also known as the Elder, who is responsible for allocating player destinations, first picks out the strongest-looking men, and then the second batch consists of some players who appear to be in good condition. The last remaining are thin and weak people like Sangqi. They choose players as experimental objects for testing goo, so they naturally have to choose people who are stronger and stronger, otherwise they won't be able to withstand a round of goo insect experiments and waste a goo in vain. Sangqi and some other players who looked weak and powerless were initially selected by the Elder, and these selected and ultimately left behind, seemingly worthless experimental items, were sent to the hands of the young priest. When the Elder faced the young man, his expression was very respectful, but what he did was not as respectful as what he said. This layer-by-layer filtering is also like a game mechanism. Players who are weak and unable to protect themselves, even if they cannot touch the threshold of the dungeon, will be directly eliminated. So I, who claims to be a goddess, am currently your best collaborator, right? Sangqi curved his lips and smiled with a seductive feeling. The person with no choice is not me, Your Highness. But you. From the beginning, you could only choose me. I know that the priestess is not a simple person. You are waiting for an opportunity to completely change the village. The girl's tone slightly increased, Your Excellency, you didn't believe that I was a goddess from the beginning. Is it because you have some unknown information in your hands? Sangqi looked up with a smile on his face. Deep in my eyes, I am determined. From the information inadvertently revealed by the barrage, it can be seen that this priest has never appeared in the past process, or in other words, the dungeon information explored by players in the past is not enough to make the priest appear. The game system is based on the performance of past player dungeons. When Sangqi was taken to see the priest, she was already judged to be doomed. Therefore, even if the barrage information exceeded her player's understanding, she was allowed to see that information. This is a loophole in the system and the only life-saving straw for her to survive at that time. She is also someone who has played games, but she doesn't think that designing a mysterious NPC with a valuable identity in the scene is just idle. Moreover, Sangqi looked up and met the boy's eyes. She was looking at the delicate and beautiful mole at the corner of the young priest's eye. It's hard to justify an NPC with such exquisite modeling without any plot. In that case, it would be too wasteful. The boy just looked at her thoughtfully. After a while, the priest spoke without much emotion, "One day." Sangqi blinked and said, "What?" End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The Land of Witches and Gums. In one day, you can conduct investigations anywhere in the village, the young man said. If you want to know the information in my hands, you also need to exchange it with other valuable information. My little collaborator. Sangqi nodded lightly and said, "Deal." The sky had completely darkened, and there was no one around the dark cave under the wilderness, except for the sound of the young man crushing the fallen leaves under his feet, which exploded in his ear like a thunderbolt. Chen Shen breathed heavily. He almost walked into the cave in front of him with the jar in his hands. His heart was beating fast and his hands were shaking. His poisonous insects have been fed to the later stage, and gradually there is a slight sense of connection with him. In his sleep, Chen Shen seemed to be entangled by countless tentacles, making him completely unable to breathe. The voice, like a demon whispering, kept circling in his mind, demanding that he go to the Snake Cave. Snake Cave. It is the most mysterious and dangerous place in the village. All players killed due to insects and various reasons will be brought here. Chen Shen didn't know what this mature goo bug wanted to do. His heart was beating fast, and with the help of props and Klitsch AS, he became one of the last few people to survive. But the goo insect also gave him a hint of unavoidable fear. He must do it, otherwise if something happens to the insect, he won't be able to survive. The insect placed in the jar excitedly tugged at the front of the jar, rubbing against the edge of the jar and making a piercing sound, appearing particularly strange in a quiet environment. Chen Shen regretted it a bit, but he was already standing here and couldn't turn back. The visibility inside the cave is very low, but the smell of blood is unusually strong, accompanied by a slight stench of decay. Chen Shen used to be a game anchor and knew how to play any game. He would also conduct tests on some games before they were released, so he had a rough idea of this environment. There must be something inside, maybe it's related to the entire dungeon. But when you come in, you also have to have your life taken. Chen Shen's teeth trembled and he finally stopped at a fork in the cave. He chuckled dryly and said, "Where should we go next?" The barrage was sent out sparsely. The anchor is a bit bold, it's quite good to dare to come here, most anchors dare not come to forbidden areas like Snake Cave, after all, it's a beginner dungeon. Other anchors dare not come, so if an anchor dares to explore, he already surpasses others by a lot, okay. In the front, the Snake Cave is indeed dangerous, but there is one thing that is not quite right. This anchor is not the first to investigate the Snake Cave. Has there been any other anchor who has come, yes, earlier than the anchor, already deep in the cave? Regarding the barrage of other players, Chen Shen couldn't see it. He could only see people praising him for his courage, as well as sporadic rewards. The account with more points made Chen Shen more stable. He opened them all to exchange for a protective umbrella, and most of his points were deducted, causing Chen Shen to feel a slight pain. The insect in his arms was clearly more inclined towards the right side of the road, eagerly pulling the jar. Chen Shen held up his protective umbrella prop and walked cautiously forward. Umbrella. A C-level prop that can protect users from contamination and injury for half an hour. For beginner dungeons, this prop is enough to protect them from worry. It's just that there are too many points needed, and Chen Shen also saved up for a while before daring to come here. He walked forward with trembling fear, and strangely, the smell of blood grew stronger and stronger, but the protective umbrella remained intact without any attack, with many traces of dragging around. It's like something has all gone forward. The reason why the Snake Cave is called a Snake Cave is because there are many very poisonous snakes living in the cave. Chen Shen changed his flashlight and could see traces of small snakes crawling on the ground, but surprisingly, no snakes appeared around. Looking at these crawling marks, it seems like they have all moved forward. It's very neat, like being summoned by something. The insect in his arms impatiently began to collide with the jar, urging Chen Shen to stay still for a long time. Chen Shen dared not stop and could only calculate the remaining points. He spoke up and interacted with the barrage, saying, "There are traces on the ground. These snakes seem to be following something towards the interior. I guess it's a ritual." The barrage was scattered, and Chen Shen glanced at the number of people online and suddenly noticed a sharp decline in the number of people. He is a bit confused. Wait, did any of his words offend the audience? Is it just a very rational analysis? The blocked barrage brushes rapidly. Everyone. Guide to the Sangqi live broadcast room, there's something great. Damn it, the one in front, don't lie to me, I'm going. Sigh, I saw it, I'm back. This Sangqi. Is the road quite wild? Sangqi exchanged lighting tools and turned on a flashlight. She entered the snake cave before it was completely dark, but not alone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the unknown territory. Snake Cave. Sangqi curved his lips and introduced to the audience in the live broadcast room with a smile, I am your tour guide this time, Sangqi. Please sit firmly and hold on, tourists. I am about to start this journey. Is the anchor originally a tour guide? Times have changed, and the world is not as good as before. Just like now, I call her wife and she calls me tourist friends. Which little anchor is this who killed himself? He dares to explore the snake cave in the early stages. Good guy, he doesn't even bring Gubu. The new one in front. The anchor is not a petri dish for Gubu, I suggest watching the replay. Are you going alone to increase the performance of Snake Cave? Laugh to death. Sangqi glanced at the barrage, but his expression remained unchanged. The girl still smiled at the live broadcast room with curved eyebrows and eyes, her dark and beautiful pupils as clear as a deer. Welcome new friends, Sangqi said cheerfully, don't you bring Gubu? No, I did. The curve around the girl's lips widened a bit, and she seemed to be in a good mood. She slowly pulled down her sleeve, revealing a fair and smooth arm. On Sangqi's arm, there was a black snake coiled, with amber-colored pupils slightly narrowed. The snake's body was only the size of a thumb, but its color was extremely black and bright. The little black snake stood up slightly and spat out its snake venom towards the direction of the snake cave, with a faint red glow on its head. Dot. 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 Wait a minute, I'm not mistaken, am I? Isn't this the snake of the little priest? Did the anchor kidnap the priest's goo? How can a collaborator's business be called a crutch? Dot. Sangqi slowly raised a finger and stood it on his lips, gently shushing, with an unknown smile on his lips, his eyes full of cunning, I'm just borrowing it for a moment. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. The Land of Witch and Gum 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. The Land of Witch and Gum 9, the little black snake of the young priest seemed curious about her, perhaps because it had not been touched by anyone other than the priest's head, and the little black snake was not very aggressive towards her. Before Sangqi left, the young priest was focused on refining medicine. His little black snake is crouching on the windowsill. Sangqi had planned to go out on his own, but when he passed by the windowsill, the small black snake, which was originally lying on its stomach, lifted its head and raised it in Sangqi's direction, actively lowering its head. Although the little black snake couldn't speak, Sangqi inexplicably understood its meaning. Woman, do you want to touch my head again? Then show mercy and let you touch it. Sangqi pondered for a moment, not only touching his head, but also carrying the entire snake out of his pocket. The snake cave is a taboo and dangerous place for many people in the village. Otherwise, when she first entered the dungeon, she would not have been judged dead just because of that sentence thrown into the snake cave. The habitat of snakes varies depending on their species, with a variety of habitats ranging from burrows to the ground. Another point is that snakes are a temperature-changing animal whose body temperature changes with temperature, because snakes themselves do not have a complete temperature regulation mechanism to generate and maintain a constant body temperature. The cave in front of me is the taboo of the village, the snake cave. The small black snake on its arm was entwined casually, but its thumb-thick body made it seem harmless, if Sangqi hadn't seen the mutated fangs in the black snake's mouth. According to the information currently available to Sangqi, it is certain that players in the early stages will die if thrown into the snake cave, but the snake cave is a key investigation site, and later players will inevitably come here to find clues. So why can later players come here? What are there more players in the later stages than in the beginning? Sangqi said with a gentle tone, strange things that don't belong to the players themselves. It's goo. The later players have goo in their hands, and this goo is the key to protecting them from damage in the snake cave. Sangqi has no goo. But it doesn't matter, she's the one who abducts others. Sangqi had a gentle smile on her face as she scanned the live broadcast room and interacted in a gentle voice. Snakes that belong to cave-dwelling life are mostly primitive and low-level small and medium-sized snakes. They are mostly nocturnal and non-toxic. At this point, the girl's voice paused for a moment, and she frowned thoughtfully. The venomous snakes in the dungeon cannot be compared to ordinary snakes, but the appearance of snakes is never beyond the habits of real snakes. There is still reference value for the common habits of these animals. In theory, snakes living in caves have small heads and strong skull connections, small mouth, slightly protruding in front of the mouth, with underdeveloped eyes, short tail, the abdominal scales are undifferentiated or underdeveloped. Snakes are mostly harmless to humans. The snakes in the dungeon are not venomous snakes, they may be even more venomous than real sea snakes. I really care about the poisonous insects and medicinal herbs in the village. I seem to have seen similar architectural styles here in magazines before. I guess the formation of the dungeon should rely on the elements of certain things in reality, blending these elements together. Since the dungeon has undergone strange changes on the basis of reality, there should be objects that have undergone such changes. Sangqi's tone was very light and slow, as if chatting with good friends about ordinary topics such as, what's the weather like? When she finally realized it, she shyly smiled at the live broadcast room. Of course, this is just my guess. Live room bullet screen area. Hiss, the feeling of this kind of knowledge passing through my mind without leaving a trace really fascinates me. I seem to understand, but I don't seem to understand at all. My head hurts so much, it seems like I'm going to grow a brain. As mentioned earlier, the anchor's meaning should be that most normal cave-dwelling snakes are non-toxic, but the snakes in the dungeon are highly poisonous. This kind of dungeon scene is based on reality, and this sharp change is likely due to something unusual hidden in the snake cave, which turned the non-toxic snakes into venomous ones. The class representative went up to me, my beautiful and intelligent wife Sangqi. Sangqi had already entered the depths of the snake cave, relying on the light of the flashlight in his hand to distinguish the road ahead. The small black snake perched on his forearm had already poked its head out, occasionally spitting out snake venom towards the front. The surroundings were very quiet, so quiet that Sangqi could only hear his own heartbeat. She pursed her lips slightly, and suddenly a gust of wind came from the side. Sangqi was startled for a moment and quickly dodged on his side. He only realized with a flashlight that it was a small snake. He had just jumped off the stone wall and now landed on the ground. In an instant, she felt a slight tingling on her scalp. This legless reptile had never been her strong suit, at most she could control running without pulling her legs out. The girl stood still, shaking the flashlight in her hand. Countless eyes seemed to appear around her in an instant. Sangqi looked back with a feeling and met the countless sparkling snake pupils in the darkness. "WOC, I'm about to suffer from a phobia, so many snakes. I'm afraid all the snakes in the snake cave have gathered here." In front of him were countless stacked snake bodies, densely blocking Sangqi's path when he arrived. Looking around, Sangqi couldn't find any place to rest. "Hi." Sangqi smiled and waved at the countless small snakes in front of him. Obviously, it doesn't work. Because these snakes spat out snake venom at her and got closer. Sangqi pursed her lips. The road when she arrived was already blocked, and she could only move forward. These snakes seem not intending to pout on her, blocking her path, it seems just to force her to move forward. The small black snake on its shoulder moved, and its pupils turned red in an instant. It stood up and spat out snake venom at the small snake in front of Sangqi, emitting a threatening sound from its throat. The snake pack was somewhat wary and retreated a little. Sangqi glanced and turned around to continue walking forward. Her purpose in coming here is to investigate what is hidden inside the snake cave. Even if these snakes don't stop her, she will still go deeper. The Snake Cave One-Day Tour group has officially set off. Tourists, please sit still and hold on. Don't fall behind. Sangqi gently touched the head of the little black snake on his shoulder, lowered his eyes, and spoke in a light and lively tone, naturally and skillfully interacting with the live broadcast room. The girl clenched the flashlight in her hand and took steps towards the inside. The interior of the snake cave was damp and dim, and the group of snakes behind her always kept a short distance from Sangqi, but never fell behind and closely followed her. The snake's belly rubbed the ground, making a scalp-tingling sound. The small black snake on its shoulder always stands up and looks at the group of snakes behind it. As long as they dare to cross a safe distance, it will make a difficult move. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Land of Witches and Gums. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Land of Witches and Gums. It's the Little Protector. The little black snake was originally focused on staring at the group of snakes behind him. When it heard this sentence, its pupils trembled for 2 seconds, and it turned to look at Sangqi, just in front of the girl's smiling eyes. Sangqi spoke sincerely, "I'm really happy that you're willing to protect me." The little black snake seemed stunned for 2 seconds, then turned its head and spat out its snake venom. It's strange, the snake's expression hasn't changed at all. But it just feels like it's shy, isn't it? Take a look, what a loyal goo, and the owner is not the host himself. He can be maintained by other goo like this. The host is very familiar with the owner of goo, right? Returning upstairs, probably just to kill each other's familiarity. Upstairs is not accurate yet, it should be a relationship of, on the surface, we have been living together for a long time, but behind the scenes, we have been waiting to die, but we have to cooperate due to interests. Right. It's really complicated. Lighting a cigarette, Sangqi interacted with the live broadcast room haphazardly, and her voice was always peaceful because the cave was too dark to capture Sangqi's face clearly. So no one saw the girl's indifferent expression. The professional competence of a professional fraudster is the weight she puts on the other end of the scale. And the ultimate benefits that these people can bring to her will determine how much chips Sangqi will add to her end. If the benefits are huge enough, she can even bet on herself. During the conversation, Sangqi stood still. She has reached the center of the snake cave. The internal structure is convoluted and complex, but Sangqi never made a mistake, thanks to the group of snakes behind him. At the fork in the road, if Sangqi made a mistake, the group of snakes would make restless noises. If it weren't for the small black snakes suppressing her, they might have rushed up and pointed her the way. It's here. Sangqi's gaze shifted away from the live broadcast room, and when he turned his head, he saw a huge, upright ice coffin. Inside the ice coffin lay a woman who was completely red and naked. Her hair had grown very long, and the thick black hair covered her body. Her eyes were tightly closed, her face was delicate and beautiful, and her whole body was a bit radiant and fair. The woman placed her hands overlapping on her lower abdomen, holding a black cross in her hand. Through the ice coffin, the person showed a slightly lifeless paleness, as the coffin was upright, making it look like she was standing in place. And most importantly, Sangqi slowly raised his eyes, his gaze slightly frozen for a moment. No wonder the elder was so easily intimidated by her. The woman in front of him was probably the rumored goddess, and her face was at least 7 or 8 points similar to Sangqi's. It's really similar. I used to feel like the anchor had a familiar face but couldn't remember it. Originally, I didn't think the anchor looked so much like a goddess, but now the two of them are standing together. Is this one like Qing? The group of snakes that were originally following Sangqi spontaneously avoided the girl and surrounded the ice coffin from both sides. All the snake groups were watching the people inside the ice coffin, like a mysterious ritual. You say. Sangqi's voice sounded low, what would happen if we set off a fire now? The little black snake suddenly turned back, its pupils filled with astonishment. But the girl had already tidied up her expression and said calmly, I was joking. Her face had returned to normal, her gaze fixed on the ice coffin for a long time, and there was a hint of coldness in the depths of her eyes. Sangqi's intuition has always been accurate. And now, her intuition is that this holy ice coffin is exceptionally dangerous. Since Sangqi entered the snake cave, she could clearly feel the body of the small black snake on her shoulder tighten in an instant. It no longer stared at the snake pack with vigilance, but stared at the ice coffin with astonishingly bright amber snake pupils. Sangqi withdrew his gaze and gently touched the head of the little black snake. She took 2 steps closer to the position of the ice coffin. The snake pack has already surrounded the ice coffin, and the snake pack that was originally following behind Sangqi in danger is now as quiet as a chicken in front of the ice coffin, staring fervently and devoutly at the sleeping woman inside. Yes. Sleepy. This goddess looked as if she was asleep, except for her pale face, which exuded a sacred and cold aura all over her. Is this the kind camp that can be seen at a glance in the game? Sangqi rubbed her chin, and when she looked up again, she seemed to have caught the gaze of the goddess in a daze. Sangqi. I'm not sure, let's take a look. When the girl looked up again with suspicion, the expression of the sleeping goddess inside the ice coffin remained unchanged. She was like a mysterious collectible placed in a shop window, beautiful, holy, and lifeless. Sangqi shook his wrist, raised the flashlight in his hand, and aimed it at the location inside the ice coffin not far away. The light shone straight into the eyes of the goddess. Almost as soon as Sangqi raised his hand, the surrounding snake swarm became restless. They spit out snake venom in the form of protectors towards Sangqi, revealing their venomous teeth in their mouths. Sangqi raised his eyebrows slightly. She glanced at the densely packed snake in front of her and then looked up at the holy person inside the ice coffin. So this is the pollution source in the game, Sangqi pondered. The game is based on reality, and the reason why non-toxic snakes become poisonous is that there are some things in the cave that should not exist, polluting the snake group that originally did not have toxicity. And, Sangqi glanced at the group of snakes faithfully guarding the ice coffin. The goddess found herself a group of loyal and ruthless bodyguards. Sangqi lifted his hand and grabbed the tail of the small black snake on his shoulder, quickly throwing it into the snake pack. Go, Pikachu. The snake group that was originally staring at Sangqi with fierce eyes was like seeing a ghost, and in an instant, it fled everywhere, with a small black snake as the center, and no snake dared to approach within a radius of 2 meters. Little black snake. It's just a safe tool snake. The little black snake moved twice on the ground and turned to look at Sangqi, who innocently smiled at it. It was indifferent for 2 seconds, crawling forward obediently. Sangqi kept walking under his feet, following behind the small black snake. The group of snakes avoided the small black snake like avoiding a plague, staring at Sangqi's figure and hesitating for a while, but not daring to approach. False snake power of man, light a cigarette, that's nice to hear, little snake. It's not even my own goo woo woo woo, I admire it. Wife is really nice to watch, Sihasha, reward 100 points, so, is this the feeling of having a Pokémon? Sangqi followed the little black snake with a sigh in her voice. The little black snake stopped for a second and turned to look at Sangqi. Strange, can you see disgust in the emotionless snake's pupils? I shouldn't have been guilty. I actually wanted to take it, reward 50 points, Sangqi slightly curled her lips and crouched down, placing the small black snake in her hand. Her tone and expression were sincere, thank you. The little black snake was stunned for a second. The girl continued, Pikachu. Little Black Snake. End of this chapter.